While taking Cosmos, I also attended a seminar on the art and architecture of ancient Pompeii. I consistently found myself analyzing material from one class through the perspectives of the other. This project is a more structured amalgam of those ideas I've had over the course of the semester, and in this video, I will describe cosmic elements in 15 examples of Roman art and architecture. Most of these examples are in or were originally found in Pompeii after its excavation, but there are a few outliers that we also discussed in class. I will be applying 10 cosmic elements and highlighting them when they appear in the examples. These examples arose from our discussions in class as frequent aspects of cosmic representations we considered, and many are closely tied to the idea of the imago mundi, although most of the examples do not really fall under that specific category. Borders or limits. Illustrations of boundaries often appear in cosmic representations, ordering a cosmos into different parts. Order and ornament. The presence of order and ornament is a defining feature of cosmic representations, and discerning how they interact with each other has been one of my favorite processes. Being and becoming. Being is the ideal that never changes, while becoming is the physical that is always changing and striving to become the ideal. The dichotomy between these two elements consistently appears in cosmic representations. Dichotomies and their limits. Sometimes it is necessary to examine the dichotomies like order and ornament and being and becoming themselves. Are they really opposed, and do the aspects of the cosmic representation really fall into those categories? Elements. Another cosmic element is, well, elements themselves. Metal, fire, earth, water, but also abstracts like love and strife, shout out Empedocles, can form the basis of cosmic representations. Perspectives. Perspectives of subjects depicted in cosmic representations, as well as the perspective of the viewer, can be important elements in understanding the meaning of a cosmic representation. Physical and psychological landscapes. Especially in examples of an imago mundi, the design of landscapes provides the background for the author's intention in a cosmic representation. Genealogies or evolutions. Cosmic representations will often include how a subject evolves over time. Gods and the ethereal. Since the first examples of cosmic representation, otherworldly beings have been included as a touchstone and a way for viewers to understand the work in front of them. Change and histories. The idea of change, history, and how the past influences the future are consistent themes in cosmic representations. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of cosmic elements, but they make up a healthy sample of the recurring themes we've come across in cosmic representations. In addition to remarking on these elements when they appear in the following examples, I will also include some of my interpretation of each work and how it makes me feel as a viewer. One thing I have learned is that when analyzing cosmic representations, how they affect you emotionally can be just as important as recognizing cosmic elements. When viewing the Alexander mosaic, I'm immediately struck by the relationship between order and chaos, and how it is characterized by the movement of groups and individuals. The broad order of the piece is the dichotomy between the forces of Alexander and Darius III's soldiers, with the former charging into the latter, but on the micro scale, there is immense variation in the movement of individual figures. My eye is drawn from left to right, following Alexander's charge, but this motion is repelled by the Persian spears and their leader's outstretched hand. It almost feels like, if I keep watching, the charge will continue and both armies will exit the frame from left to right, perhaps leaving behind a dead horse or a discarded shield under the gnarled tree in the background. There's so much movement in this mosaic, but frozen in this frame, the movement reconciles into a symmetry. Both sides are broadly ordered against each other, with Alexander's forces sweeping in from the left, and Darius III's soldiers fleeing to the right, but this order breaks down when you focus on individuals in the mosaic. Everyone conveys a slightly different motion. In the same vein, the two armies can be separated by garb and general movement as they confront each other in the battle. If you focus on a smaller segment of the work, that dichotomy breaks down for lone soldiers experiencing the chaos of war. This piece's main perspectives are those of Alexander and Darius, but the artist gives insight into how each figure may be feeling at the moment. The actual landscape of the scene is desolate, and over it, the armies create a writhing new one. This mosaic is a microcosm of the larger change of Alexander's triumph over Persia, and the Romans likely looked to the Macedonian leader as an ideal example of military strength. This painting feels more personal to me than Louis Gauffier's depiction, which we discussed in class. Achilles is pulled literally out of the joyful moment he was experiencing just before. Playing with a sword and shield now falls under a different light as Achilles is confronted with actually using those tools for war. I know it is a different shield, but for me, it still represents a conception of the world. Achilles places it on the ground, a cornucopia lies next to it, forgotten. Achilles is beset by two attackers who threaten his worldview, and this is the beginning of the struggle for his use as a pawn by the Greeks and the gods during the Trojan War. For the greatest warrior of them all, the fear is evident in his eyes. Achilles is reminded of his existence within a larger order of hierarchy among the Greeks, a fact that causes turmoil later in his story, all while experimenting with the ornamentation of a woman combined with that of a warrior. He is a great fighter, but does not always exemplify that ideal. In this portrayal, he dons an alternative form while Odysseus tricks him into a different presentation. The Ithacan exploits the dichotomy of Greek men and women to reveal Achilles' true identity. No warrior wears the clothes of a woman, and no woman would want to play with a sword and shield. Achilles' perspective is centered, and the artist expertly illustrates his fear. As a viewer, I feel anger towards Odysseus and a sense of protection for Achilles. In the Roman Empire, the theater served as a place not just for the performance of actors, but also for audience members. Cicero discusses how citizens of high status would sit on the lower seats and watch the play, just as they would be observed by the rest of the audience. These tiers of performance worked in conjunction with the inherent hierarchy of the seating arrangement and the semicircular shape of the theater. The theater was a place where everyone played a role in one form or another, and this structure of observation, performance, and perspective strikes me as very cosmic. The theater is clearly stratified between the stage, the seats reserved for important citizens, and the rest of the audience. The dichotomy between the audience and the performers was not as clear as one might expect. Those sitting in the front rows also put on a type of performance for everyone attending. The semicircular shape directs the viewer or audience member to look down towards the center. I do not know what the scene depicts, and the guesses scholars have proposed remain unconvincing to me, especially because the original may have been painted over in many places by archaeologists. The painting is bordered on the top and bottom, and seems to follow a linear timeline around the room. On the meta level, the painting is cosmic to me because it is ordered in space and composition, and also at the same time makes absolutely no sense. Each scene merges with the next, supposedly blending different points in time with one another. The whole scene, however, is surrounded by thick boundaries, clearly delineating where the world begins and ends. This painting might depict the journey of a young woman as she prepares for marriage, but as I said before, I'm not really convinced. Either way, the evolution of the fresco as it surrounds the room is still an exciting puzzle to follow. I would like to highlight this entire room as possessing cosmic properties simply from the layout of its wall paintings. Architectural panels are laid out symmetrically among paintings of different scenes. This organization creates a sense that the room defies the laws of space, but not necessarily in an uncomfortable way. The boundaries between each panel on the three walls create an interesting geometry for the viewer. Each panel follows a strict order with interspersed embellishment, and the paintings exist within a wider order than their own specific scenes. Some scenes illustrate mythological tales, while others attempt to trick the viewer into imagining an expanded room complete with extra architectural features. This miniature frieze portrays cupids as they show the steps in working metal. This painting possesses cosmic elements for me because it follows a timeline from left to right, following the metal on its journey through change. Metal on its own has a hard time not being cosmic, but there's something about being able to pinpoint any stage in the process of its transformation all within a single image. This scene shows a piece of metal's journey as it transforms into its final shape. While an order exists, the viewer can observe every stage of the process at once. The focus of this work is not necessarily on the cupids, but a piece of metal as it undergoes transformation. Relatedly, this piece also touches on the cosmic element of evolution. The Cupid's workshop implies the passage in time from left to right, showing a history of the metal. This cosmos of fish is nicely bordered by oceanic or vegetative forms. In class, we pondered if this might have been a menu of what fish might be available to eat. From our discussion of the Enlightenment in class, I have been fascinated by how cosmic the human desire to order everything is. I also find this mosaic interesting because it seamlessly melds the abstract with the realistic. Everything in the central scene appears realistic, but the fish are floating in the air. I wonder if all of these are real sea creatures or if the artist snuck in a hypothetical fish or two into their work. The fish are surrounded by a border of more abstract forms, and they are also ordered to be clear to the viewer. However, they exist outside of their natural state. These are realistic depictions in an unrealistic setting. I wanted to mention the cosmic properties of Pompeian gardens. This example is from the house of Julia Felix, but channels with walkways are present throughout the city in different forms and sizes. I find it amusing that even some smaller houses possessed all of the garden elements of larger houses, just in a more compact space. The layout of these gardens seemed very ordered and pristine, but often functional as well. They were also linked to the dining experience in some houses like this one. People at dinner in the triclinium could look out into the garden and survey a constructed world in miniature that was open to their exploration. Gardens were an important part of Pompeian houses, and they often existed internally, melding with the rest of the rooms. These gardens may have represented a kind of ideal oasis, but were also functionally used for food production. An artificial stream with bridges often traveled through Pompeian gardens, providing a sightline for observation by residents or visitors. When considering this area of Hadrian's villa, I am reminded of Julia Felix's garden, but brought to the maximum level. The area in the foreground is carved into the rock and surrounded by statues and pillars, constructing its own cosmos that stretches out across the water. Whereas the garden of Julia Felix constructs a controlled natural scene, this location revels in its artificiality, unabashedly inserting its own ideals into the landscape. This grotto confuses the dichotomy between human construction and the natural environment. This is one of the most cosmic architectural examples I've encountered anywhere. A quaint island inside Hadrian's villa serves as a house within an estate for the emperor. That island is a purposefully isolated microcosm of the massive structures surrounding it. I wonder what he actually used it for. At first, I did not understand the true scale of the villa until I saw an image of it from above, but now I understand why Hadrian might have wanted to build a retreat like this. The moat surrounding the island creates a clear boundary between it and the rest of the villa. Its setting defines a clear order, while the actual content of the island is purposefully ornamental in design. The perfectly circular shape of the island amplifies its artificiality. The island was originally surrounded by high walls, obstructing the perspective of onlookers while protecting someone on the island. The sightlines inside certain sections of Hadrian's villa possess cosmic aspects for me in the way that they shepherd the viewer's perspective and body through a series of small rooms. Internal windows open into inaccessible rooms, from where the person stands, and atriums open to the sky. You can see through multiple rooms through these windows while standing in one place. It is a little hard to discern from the image, but the picture was taken on one side of an atrium, and the sightline travels across the atrium through one room and across another. These areas of the villa remind me of a labyrinth, but not nearly as frightening as the one on Crete. These internal windows are all about perspective. The viewer can see through what would otherwise be multiple opaque walls, without being able to physically move along the same sightline. This 18th century depiction of a ritual in the Temple of Isis complex is almost certainly overdramatized and inaccurate, but it is a cosmic imagining of the Roman world at a time when the Romantic period was emerging. The moon's light contrasts with the blaze of fire on the other side of the temple. Columns frame the scene. The priest in the center seems to wield power over the elements and the crowd at once. This is an imagining of an ornate ceremony adhering to a strict order of performance. The Nile waters under the Purgatorium in the foreground sit before the raging flames of a fire behind. The artist's depiction of the moon gives the viewer a sense that Isis, in one of her many forms, may be observing the ceremony. On the run from Hera, Io visits Isis in Egypt. This painting is cosmic for me primarily because of what it represented for Romans visiting the Temple of Isis in Pompeii. The worship of Isis was widespread through the social hierarchy, but Isis was seen as a goddess of protection, like a mother figure, and she probably had special meaning for marginalized groups in Roman society like slaves, women, and freedmen. The Temple of Isis was the first temple to be reconstructed after the earthquakes in Pompeii, a fact that might play into the goddess's status as a beacon of salvation from the wrath of other gods, as shown in this painting. Isis gives sanctuary to Io, representing the kind of sanctuary a potential initiate might find by joining the goddess's cult. Io grows horns on her head, transecting the boundary between human and animal. They symbolize her transformation from heifer back to human. I will be honest and admit to wanting to include this painting in large part due to its eerie quality and decay. Egyptian influence in the Roman Empire, especially in the period during and after the War of Actium, is a subject I am very interested in. If I was a Roman who already had a negative view of Egypt, this image would not change my mind. This painting is cosmic for me because it represents the confluence of two cultures, or more accurately, one co-opting aspects of another. In this way, it portrays a cosmos of indirect trans-Mediterranean communication with a background of violence. Isis is a goddess who holds the promise of protection, even though she herself came under threat from the Roman elite during the war. The Isaic priest wears an otherworldly mask while rooted to the earth with sandaled feet. They cross the dichotomy between human form and a different being, but also between Greece and Egypt. The mask represents the god of Anubis. This painting, especially in its decayed state, communicates an uncanny feeling. Visitors to the cave would row down the channel to the artificial island and dine surrounded by statues depicting Odysseus and his men blinding Polyphemus. This journey mirrors that of Odysseus and his men as they traveled from island to island on their voyage home. This site is so fascinating to me because it constructs an experience for the participant with confusing and dark undertones. Imagine being a guest of Tiberius. What does it mean that you are visiting an island that explicitly relates to the home of Polyphemus? Visitors must cross the boundary of water in order to dine in the grotto. The meaning behind the sculptures implores the guests of Tiberius to evaluate their role. The water and small island represent Thrinacia, Polyphemus' home, and the sea surrounding it, while also blending the viewer's perception of the real and the mythological. These are just some examples of the cosmic elements present in Roman art and architecture. Each element helps construct a novel cosmos for the viewer, guiding their experience and interpretation of each work.